The summer air was thick with anticipation as 12-year-old Anthony adjusted his bow tie in front of the mirror. His reflection showed a young boy trying his best to look composed, but his eyes held a weight far beyond his years. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of his mother's life, her wedding day. But Anthony knew something that threatened to shatter everything. The grand ballroom of the Pine Grove Community Center had been transformed into an elegant wedding venue. White lilies and roses adorned every corner, their sweet scent mixing with the nervous energy that filled the room. Anthony watched as his mother, Rose, floated around in her ivory wedding dress, her face glowing with joy as she greeted guests and accepted their congratulations. His soon-to-be stepfather, Richard, stood near the altar, looking sharp in his tailored suit. To everyone else, Richard was the perfect catch, a successful businessman who had swept Rose off her feet after she had spent 5 years raising Anthony alone. But Anthony had discovered something that made his stomach churn every time he looked at Richard's practiced smile. It had started 3 months ago when Anthony was using Richard's laptop to finish his homework. A notification had popped up, an email that would change everything. At first, Anthony thought he was seeing things, but as he dug deeper, his hands trembling over the keyboard, the truth became undeniable. Richard wasn't who he claimed to be. The email thread revealed conversations with another family, a wife and 2 children in another state who had no idea about Rose or this wedding. Anthony had found bank statements showing regular transfers to this secret family, along with photos of Richard at birthday parties and family vacations that had supposedly been business trips. For weeks, Anthony had carried this burden alone. He had tried to tell his mother twice, but Richard always seemed to appear at just the right moment, steering the conversation away with his charismatic charm. Anthony had even attempted to reach out to his Aunt Lisa, but she had dismissed his concerns as pre-wedding jitters and resistance to change. As the wedding march began to play and guests rose from their seats, Anthony felt his heart hammering against his ribs. His mother stood at the back of the room, clutching her bouquet, ready to walk down the aisle toward what she thought was her happy ending. Time seemed to slow down as Anthony watched her take the first step. The truth burned in his throat like fire. He looked around at the smiling faces of their friends and family, all unknowing participants in Richard's elaborate lie. Anthony thought about his mother's journey, how hard she had worked to build a stable life for them after his father passed away, how much she deserved genuine happiness, not this carefully constructed facade. In that moment, Anthony realized that sometimes being brave meant being willing to break something to save it from shattering completely. As his mother reached the halfway point of the aisle, Anthony stood up from his front row seat. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady as he spoke the words that would change everything. "Mom, wait. There's something you need to know." The music screeched to a halt. 200 pairs of eyes turned to stare at the young boy in the perfectly pressed suit who dared to interrupt this perfect moment. Anthony saw Richard's face darken with recognition. He knew that Anthony knew. But more importantly, Anthony saw his mother's face, filled with concern and love for her son, and he knew he was doing the right thing. The truth was about to come out, and nothing would ever be the same again. The silence that followed Anthony's words was deafening. The grand ballroom, which moments ago had been filled with the soft melody of the wedding march, now hummed with confused whispers and shifting feet. Rose stood frozen in the aisle, her white dress catching the afternoon light that streamed through the stained glass windows. "Baby, what's wrong?" Rose's voice wavered as she took a step toward her son, concern etched across her face. The bouquet trembled slightly in her hands, white roses catching the light like morning frost. Anthony felt his throat tighten as he looked at his mother's worried expression. Behind her, he could see Richard's face transforming from confusion to something darker, a silent warning that made Anthony's spine tingle. But he had come too far to back down now. "He's married, Mom," Anthony's voice carried through the stunned silence. "Richard has another family in Cleveland. He's been lying to all of us." The words tumbled out like water breaking through a dam, unstoppable and raw. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Aunt Lisa, who had dismissed Anthony's concerns weeks ago, stood up from her seat, her hand covering her mouth. Richard's best man shifted uncomfortably, avoiding everyone's gaze. "That's ridiculous," Richard's voice boomed through the room, a forced laugh following his words. He stepped down from the altar, straightening his tie with practiced ease. "Rose, honey, you know how children can get. Anthony's just having a hard time accepting change." "I have proof," Anthony interrupted, his young voice steady despite his racing heart. He pulled out Richard's old phone from his suit pocket, the one Richard thought he had properly disposed of but that Anthony had found while taking out the trash last week. "Everything's here. The emails, the pictures, even the money transfers." Rose's face drained of color as she looked between her son and her fiancé. Richard's confident facade cracked slightly, a flicker of panic crossing his features as he recognized the phone in Anthony's hand. "I can explain," Richard started, but Rose held up her hand, silencing him. She walked over to Anthony, her wedding dress rustling against the carpet. With trembling hands, she took the phone from her son. The next few minutes felt like hours as Rose scrolled through the evidence. The guests sat in uncomfortable silence, watching the scene unfold like a slow-motion car crash. Anthony stood by his mother's side, his small hand resting supportively on her arm. When Rose finally looked up, tears had smeared her carefully applied makeup, but her eyes blazed with a different kind of fire. "How long?" she asked Richard, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you been living this double life?" Richard's composed demeanor finally crumbled. "Rose, please, we can talk about this privately." "How long?" Rose's voice cracked like a whip, making several guests jump in their seats. 7 years, Richard admitted, his shoulders sagging. "But Rose, what we have is real. I was going to tell you." "Real?" Rose laughed, but it was a hollow sound that echoed off the ballroom walls. "Real like the family you have in Cleveland? Real like the life you've been living behind our backs?" She turned to address the shocked guests. "I am so sorry everyone, but there will be no wedding today." The room erupted in chaos. Richard's best man quietly slipped out the back door. Aunt Lisa rushed forward to embrace Rose, while other family members started making calls to cancel the reception venue and catering. Through it all, Anthony stood by his mother's side, his small frame straight and strong. Richard made one last attempt to approach Rose, but Anthony's Uncle Thomas stepped between them, his imposing figure making Richard think twice. "I think you should leave," Thomas said firmly, and for once, Richard had no smooth words to offer in response. As Richard walked out of the ballroom, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor, Rose turned to her son. Mascara tracks marked her cheeks, but pride shone in her eyes as she looked at Anthony. "My brave, smart boy," she whispered, pulling him into a tight hug. "Thank you for protecting us." Anthony buried his face in his mother's wedding dress, finally letting his own tears fall. The weight of the secret he had carried for so long lifted from his shoulders, replaced by the warm certainty that he had done the right thing. Later that evening, as the sun set over the community center, the ballroom that was supposed to host a wedding reception became the site of a different kind of gathering. Family and friends stayed behind, helping to pack up decorations and offering support. Someone ordered pizza, and Anthony found himself surrounded by people telling him how proud they were of his courage. Rose sat in a corner, still in her wedding dress, talking quietly with Aunt Lisa about filing a police report and contacting a lawyer. Every few minutes, she would look over at Anthony and give him a small smile, a smile that said everything would be okay, that they would get through this together, just as they had gotten through everything else life had thrown their way. As Anthony watched his mother's strength shine through her pain, he realized that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it hurts. The wedding day hadn't turned out as planned, but it had revealed something more valuable than any ceremony, the unbreakable bond between a mother and son, and the power of standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. The days following the wedding that wasn't passed in a blur of activity. Anthony watched as his mother transformed their living room into what she called Operation Truth, with papers spread across every surface and her laptop constantly open. The beautiful wedding dress hung like a ghost in its garment bag at the back of her closet, a reminder of what could have been. Rose had taken a week off from her job at the local hospital, where she worked as a nurse coordinator. She spent her days on the phone with lawyers, police officers, and, most surprisingly, with Linda, Richard's legal wife from Cleveland. The two women had formed an unexpected alliance, both victims of the same elaborate deception. "You won't believe this," Rose told Anthony one evening as they sat at their kitchen table, sharing a tub of cookie dough ice cream, their comfort food of choice. Linda found 6 other women Richard was talking to online. He had different stories for each of them. She shook her head, then reached across to squeeze Anthony's hand. "If it wasn't for you, baby, I would have become just another chapter in his book of lies." Anthony felt a mix of emotions hearing this, pride for having protected his mother, but also sadness for all the people Richard had hurt. He thought about Richard's children in Cleveland, wondering if they knew yet that their father had almost married someone else. The story had spread through their community like wildfire. At school, Anthony noticed how teachers looked at him differently now, with a mixture of sympathy and admiration. His best friend Devin had stuck by his side, fiercely defending him when some kids tried to make jokes about the wedding crasher. "You're like a real-life superhero," Devin told him during lunch break. "You saved your mom from a supervillain. That's way cooler than any movie." But being a hero wasn't always easy. Late at night, Anthony sometimes heard his mother crying in her room. He would quietly make her a cup of chamomile tea, the way she always did for him when he was upset, and leave it outside her door. The next morning, she would give him an extra tight hug, both of them understanding the unspoken language of love and support they shared. The investigation into Richard's activities revealed a pattern of fraud that stretched back nearly a decade. He had been living a life of carefully compartmentalized lies, using his business trips as cover to maintain multiple relationships across different states. The police found that he had siphoned money from his company to fund his double life, leading to charges of both fraud and embezzlement. One rainy afternoon, Detective Chen visited their house to take additional statements. As Rose provided more details, Anthony sat at the kitchen counter, working on his science homework but listening intently. "Your son's discovery probably saved more than just your marriage plans, Mrs. Taylor," Detective Chen said, her voice gentle but firm. "Richard Henderson was planning to access your pension fund and life insurance policy once you were married. He's done this before." Anthony watched his mother's face pale at this revelation, but she squared her shoulders and lifted her chin, a gesture he recognized as her way of showing strength in difficult moments. "Well, he didn't succeed this time, thanks to my little man," she said, giving Anthony a proud smile. The support from their community continued to pour in. Aunt Lisa organized a fundraiser to help recover the wedding expenses, though Rose initially resisted the idea. "I don't want people's pity," she had said, but Lisa wouldn't hear it. "This isn't pity, Rose. This is family taking care of family," Lisa insisted. "Besides, half the neighborhood wants to contribute just to show Anthony how much they admire what he did." The fundraiser turned into a community celebration of truth and courage. It was held in the same community center where the wedding was supposed to take place, but this time, the atmosphere was different. Instead of wedding decorations, children had made posters with messages like "Truth Matters" and "Heroes Come in All Sizes." Anthony's school principal even attended, presenting him with a special citizenship award. "We talk a lot about integrity and doing the right thing," she said during her speech, but Anthony showed us what that really means in practice. He reminded us that age doesn't determine courage. As summer began to fade into fall, life started settling into a new normal. Rose joined a support group for women who had experienced similar betrayals, and slowly, her smile began to reach her eyes again. She and Anthony started a new tradition of Truth Sundays, where they would cook dinner together and talk about anything and everything, no matter how difficult the subject. "You know what, Mom?" Anthony said during one of these dinners, twirling spaghetti around his fork. "I think what happened was kind of like that time I broke your favorite vase but told you right away. You said then that telling the truth right away hurts less than letting lies grow bigger." Rose paused, her fork halfway to her mouth, and looked at her son with wonder. "When did you get so wise, my love?" "I learned from the best," he replied, making her laugh, a sound that had become more frequent lately. The story of the brave boy who stopped his mother's wedding made its way through their town and beyond, inspiring others to speak up about uncomfortable truths in their own lives. A local newspaper even ran a feature about Anthony, though he found all the attention a bit embarrassing. "I just did what was right," he told the reporter who interviewed him. "Mom always says that the truth is like a lighthouse, it helps people find their way home when they're lost in the dark." As autumn leaves began to fall, Anthony noticed something important. His mother had finally taken the wedding dress out of its garment bag. She donated it to a charity that provided formal wear to underprivileged teens for prom night. "Something beautiful should come out of this," she explained as they watched the charity workers load it into their van. Winter arrived with its blanket of snow, and with it came the court proceedings against Richard. The Taylor household found itself caught up in a whirlwind of legal meetings and paperwork. Despite the stress, Anthony noticed how his mother carried herself with increasing confidence each day, as if shedding the weight of betrayal was making her stronger. One particularly cold morning, as they sat in the courthouse waiting room, Anthony observed the interaction between his mother and Linda, Richard's wife from Cleveland. The two women had developed an unexpected friendship, united by their shared experience and determination to see justice done. "Your boy saved us all," Linda told Rose, wrapping her hands around a paper cup of courthouse coffee. Her two teenagers sat nearby, absorbed in their phones but occasionally glancing at Anthony with a mix of gratitude and curiosity. "My kids were devastated at first, but now they say they're glad the truth came out before more damage was done." Rose squeezed Anthony's shoulder proudly. "He's always been my little truth-teller. Even when he was tiny, he couldn't stand seeing things that weren't right." She smiled at a memory. "Remember when you were 6, and you told your teacher that the class pet hamster escaped because someone left the cage open, even though you knew you'd get in trouble for being the one on feeding duty?" Anthony blushed at the memory but smiled. Those small moments of choosing truth over convenience had led him to this bigger moment. The district attorney had praised his careful collection of evidence, saying that his discovery of Richard's old phone had provided crucial information for the case. The impact of Richard's crimes reached far beyond their immediate families. The investigation had uncovered a complex web of financial fraud that affected his company and its employees. As the truth unraveled, more victims came forward, other women he had courted while traveling for business, colleagues whose trust he had betrayed, and investors who had lost money through his schemes. Back at school, Anthony's experience had sparked important conversations about honesty and courage. His English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had even asked him to speak to the 6th grade classes about integrity. Standing in front of his peers, Anthony felt nervous at first, but then he remembered what his mother always said: truth stands on its own feet. "It's not always easy to tell the truth," he told his classmates, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "Sometimes you might think you're protecting someone by keeping quiet, or you might be scared of what will happen if you speak up. But lies are like snowballs rolling down a hill, they just get bigger and bigger until they crash into something." His words resonated beyond the classroom. The school counselor reported that more students were coming forward about various issues they had been afraid to discuss before, from bullying to academic struggles. Anthony's courage had created a ripple effect of honesty throughout the school community. At home, Rose was going through her own transformation. She had started taking evening classes in financial fraud prevention, turning her painful experience into a mission to help others. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us show us our true purpose, she explained to Anthony one evening as they worked side by side at the kitchen table, she with her coursework, he with his math homework. The local women's support group that Rose had joined invited her to become a peer counselor. Every Tuesday evening, she would share her story with other women who had experienced similar betrayals, helping them find their way forward. Anthony would often hear snippets of their conversations when he passed by the living room, stories of healing, hope, and rebuilding trust. One night, after a particularly emotional support group meeting, Rose found Anthony in his room, working on a social studies project about everyday heroes. "You know," she said, sitting on the edge of his bed, "when I was pregnant with you, I used to wonder what kind of person you would grow up to be. I hoped you would be kind, honest, and brave. But I never imagined you would end up being my hero." Anthony looked up from his project, a lump forming in his throat. "I was scared you would be mad at me," he admitted. "For ruining your wedding day." Rose pulled him into a tight hug. "You didn't ruin anything, baby. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. You showed me what real love looks like, the kind that's brave enough to tell hard truths." As winter began to thaw into spring, the legal proceedings against Richard drew to a close. He had pleaded guilty to multiple charges of fraud and financial misconduct, receiving a significant prison sentence. The news brought mixed emotions to their household, relief that justice had been served, but also sadness for the trail of broken trust he had left behind. The story caught the attention of a national news magazine, which wanted to feature Anthony in an article about young people making a difference in their communities. At first, he was hesitant about the attention, but Rose helped him see the bigger picture. "Your story might help other kids find the courage to speak up when they see something wrong," she explained. "Sometimes being brave isn't just about the moment you take action, it's about inspiring others to do the right thing too." The interview took place in their backyard, where the first spring flowers were beginning to bloom. As Anthony spoke about his experience, he realized how much he had grown since that wedding day. He wasn't just the boy who had stopped a wedding anymore, he had become someone who understood the real meaning of love, truth, and courage. The hardest part wasn't finding out the truth, he told the interviewer. It was deciding what to do with it. But my mom always taught me that love means wanting what's best for someone, even when it's difficult. Sometimes the best way to show love is to be brave enough to tell the truth. The following spring brought unexpected changes to the Taylor household. Rose's work in fraud prevention had caught the attention of a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting vulnerable individuals from relationship scams. They offered her a position as a community outreach coordinator, combining her nursing background with her newfound passion for helping others avoid similar heartbreak. "What do you think about this opportunity?" Rose asked Anthony one evening as they walked through their neighborhood park. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom, their pink petals dancing in the gentle breeze. "It would mean some changes for us." Anthony kicked a pebble along the path, considering the question. The past year had taught him that change, even when scary, could lead to better things. "I think you should do it, Mom. You're really good at helping people, and now you can do it full-time." Rose's new role quickly became more than just a job, it became a calling. She traveled to community centers and schools across the state, sharing their story and teaching others about the warning signs she had missed. Anthony occasionally joined her for these presentations, especially when they spoke to youth groups. During one such presentation at a neighboring high school, a teenage girl approached Anthony while Rose was busy answering questions from the audience. "My mom's dating someone who reminds me of Richard," she whispered, twisting her hands nervously. "He tells lots of stories that don't add up, but she's so happy, and I'm scared to say anything." Anthony felt a familiar tightness in his chest, remembering his own struggle. "Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave," he told her, sharing his mother's wisdom. "It just means you care enough to do something difficult." He helped connect the girl with Rose, who later discovered that the man indeed had a history of romance scams. At home, their life had found a new rhythm. The pain of Richard's betrayal had transformed into wisdom, like a pearl forming around a grain of sand. Rose had started dating again, but this time with a healthy caution that Anthony noticed and appreciated. She was open with him about the people she met, and they had established their truth talks as a sacred space where concerns could be shared without fear. "You know what's different now?" Rose said during one of their Sunday morning pancake breakfasts. "I trust myself more. And a big part of that is because you trusted your instincts about Richard. You showed me that sometimes the strongest love means being willing to risk everything for the truth." Anthony's own life had evolved in unexpected ways. His experience had sparked an interest in investigative journalism, and he had joined the school newspaper. His first article, about students secretly sharing answers during online tests, had led to important discussions about academic integrity. The school principal had commended him for addressing the issue with sensitivity while standing firm for what was right. One day, while organizing old photos on Rose's laptop, Anthony found a folder labeled "Wedding Day." His hand hesitated over the mousepad, memories flooding back. Rose, noticing his pause, pulled up a chair beside him. "We can look at them together if you want," she said softly. "Sometimes it's good to remember where we've been to appreciate where we are." The photos showed moments from that fateful day: Rose in her wedding dress, the decorated community center, guests arriving with excited faces. The last photo was taken just minutes before Anthony had stood up to speak, capturing him looking at Richard with a knowledge beyond his years. "You know what I see when I look at that photo now?" Rose asked, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "I see love in its purest form, the kind that's brave enough to risk everything for someone else's well-being." Their story had begun to inspire others in unexpected ways. A local theater group adapted it into a play about truth and courage, with the proceeds going to organizations that helped people rebuild their lives after similar betrayals. Anthony attended the premiere with mixed emotions, strange as it was to see his life performed on stage, but he understood the importance of sharing their experience. The impact reached beyond their community. Rose's work with the nonprofit led to the development of a school program teaching young people about healthy relationships and the importance of trusting their instincts. They called it the Truth Tellers Initiative, and Anthony served as a youth advisor, helping shape the curriculum to resonate with kids his age. One particularly meaningful moment came when Linda's children visited from Cleveland. The teenagers who had once looked at Anthony with uncertain eyes now treated him like a brother. They spent a weekend together, sharing stories and healing old wounds, their families bound together by truth rather than lies. "You didn't just save your mom," Linda's daughter told him during their visit. "You saved our family too. Dad's actions hurt us all, but at least now we know the truth and can move forward." As Anthony's 13th birthday approached, Rose planned a celebration that was different from any they'd had before. Instead of a traditional party, she organized a Courage Festival in their backyard, inviting people who had been part of their journey over the past year, from Detective Chen to the teenage girl Anthony had helped at the high school presentation. The garden was decorated with fairy lights and handmade banners bearing quotes about truth and courage. Anthony's favorite read, "Sometimes the smallest voice speaks the biggest truth." Friends and family shared stories about times when standing up for the truth had changed their lives, creating a tapestry of experiences that showed how one brave action could ripple out to touch countless lives. During the celebration, Rose presented Anthony with a special gift, a journal bound in soft leather with his name embossed on the cover. Inside, she had written a dedication, "To my son, who taught me that love and truth are two sides of the same coin. Your courage changed not just our lives, but the lives of so many others. Keep telling your truth, my brave boy." As the sun set on the celebration, Anthony sat in their favorite spot on the porch swing, taking in the scene before him. His mother was laughing with Aunt Lisa, her face glowing with genuine happiness. Devin was teaching Linda's kids how to play his new video game. Detective Chen was deep in conversation with his school principal about expanding the Truth Tellers initiative. The summer came with an unexpected invitation. A national youth leadership conference had heard about Anthony's story and wanted him to be their keynote speaker. The event would bring together young people from across the country who had shown exceptional courage in their communities. "I don't know, Mom," Anthony said, staring at the invitation. Speaking in front of hundreds of people? He was sitting at their kitchen counter, pushing his cereal around in the bowl. The morning sun streamed through the windows, creating patterns on the granite countertop. Rose looked up from her coffee, studying her son's face. "Remember how scared you were that day at the wedding? But you spoke up anyway because it was important. Sometimes the scariest things we do become the most meaningful." The conference was being held in Washington, D.C., and as their plane descended into the Capitol, Anthony pressed his face against the window, taking in the magnificent view of the monuments below. It was his first time flying, and Rose had let him have the window seat, watching with a tender smile as he pointed out different landmarks he had learned about in school. Their hotel room overlooked the National Mall, and that evening, they took a walk among the monuments. Standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial, Rose wrapped an arm around Anthony's shoulders. "You know what makes these monuments special? They remind us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they stand up for what's right." The morning of the conference, Anthony stood backstage, adjusting his tie, different from the one he'd worn at the wedding, but carrying just as much significance. Through a gap in the curtain, he could see hundreds of young faces in the audience, all with their own stories of courage. As he walked onto the stage, the lights felt warm on his face. His mother sat in the front row, giving him an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "A year ago, I was just a kid who discovered something wrong and had to make a choice," he started. "I didn't feel brave. I felt scared and alone. But I learned that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing what's right even when you're terrified." The audience listened intently as he shared their story. He talked about the wedding day, about the aftermath, and about how one moment of truth had created ripples that were still spreading. But more importantly, he talked about what he had learned. "Truth isn't just about exposing lies," he explained. "It's about protecting the people we love. It's about building trust and showing others that they can trust themselves too. Sometimes the hardest person to tell the truth to is yourself, to admit that something isn't right, even when you wish it was." After his speech, young people lined up to share their own stories with him. A girl from Texas had reported her coach for manipulating game scores. A boy from Oregon had stood up against bullying in his school. Each story was different, but they all shared a common thread: the courage to speak up when something wasn't right. During the lunch break, Rose found Anthony sitting quietly in a corner of the conference center's garden. "You okay, baby?" she asked, sitting beside him on the stone bench. "I just realized something," he said, watching a butterfly land on a nearby flower. "Richard hurt us, but he also gave us something. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be here helping all these other people." Rose's eyes welled with tears as she pulled him close. "That's what healing looks like, sweetheart. Taking something painful and turning it into something beautiful." The conference led to new opportunities. A children's book publisher approached them about turning their story into an illustrated book for young readers. Rose and Anthony worked together with the writer and illustrator, ensuring that the message of courage and truth-telling came through in a way that children could understand. Back home, their community had continued to embrace their message. The Truth Tellers initiative had spread to neighboring school districts, and Rose was now training other survivors to become peer counselors. Their story had become a catalyst for change, inspiring others to create their own programs focused on integrity and courage. One evening, while helping his mother prepare dinner, Anthony noticed a new photo on their refrigerator. It showed Richard's children from Cleveland visiting their father in prison. "Linda sent it," Rose explained, catching his questioning look. "They're working on healing their relationship with him." It's not easy, but they're choosing truth too. The photo sparked a deep conversation about forgiveness. Does it make you angry? Anthony asked his mother. Seeing them try to forgive him? Rose carefully chopped vegetables as she considered her answer. You know what I've learned? Forgiveness isn't about excusing what someone did. It's about freeing yourself from carrying the weight of their actions. Those kids have the right to find their own path to healing, just like we did. As autumn approached again, bringing with it the anniversary of what they now called their Truth Day, Rose and Anthony decided to start a new tradition. They organized a community picnic in the park, inviting people to share stories of times when telling the truth had changed their lives. Under the canopy of golden leaves, people gathered in small groups, sharing food and experiences. The teenage girl Anthony had helped at the school presentation was there with her mother, both of them now volunteers for Rose's organization. Detective Chen brought her family, and even some of the conference attendees had traveled to join them. See that? Rose said to Anthony, gesturing at the gathering. That's what happens when one person decides to be brave. It creates a space for others to be brave too. Anthony watched as children played on the grass, parents chatted on picnic blankets, and teenagers clustered around tables filled with food. The air was filled with laughter and honest conversation, a stark contrast to the tension and secrets of that wedding day a year ago. A local artist had created a mural on a nearby community center wall, depicting a young boy standing tall amidst a storm of swirling papers and butterflies. The inscription read, "Truth is the light that shows us the way home." Anthony often walked past it on his way to school, each time reminded that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the smallest voice can speak the biggest truth. As winter melted into spring once again, Anthony found himself facing a new challenge. His middle school was hosting a Future Leaders competition, where students could propose projects to make a positive change in their community. The prize was a grant to turn their idea into reality. Sitting at his desk one evening, surrounded by crumpled papers and half-formed ideas, Anthony struggled to decide what to propose. Rose found him there, chin resting on his hands, staring at the blank paper before him. "You look deep in thought," she said, placing a mug of hot chocolate beside him. The marshmallows bobbed gently in the steaming liquid, a comfort ritual they had maintained since the wedding day. "I want to do something different," Anthony explained, turning to face his mother. "Everyone expects me to do something about truth-telling, but I've been thinking about all the kids who might be going through what I went through, feeling scared and alone with a big truth they need to tell." That night, Anthony worked late into the evening, fueled by inspiration and hot chocolate. His proposal took shape, a peer support network called Young Truth Ambassadors, where students could connect with trained peer mentors who had experience in standing up for the truth. The project presentation day arrived, and Anthony stood before the judges, his voice steady as he shared his vision. "Truth isn't just about exposing lies," he explained, echoing the wisdom he had gained over the past year. "It's about creating safe spaces where people feel brave enough to speak up." To his surprise, one of the judges was crying by the end of his presentation. She shared that her own child had recently revealed a difficult truth about bullying at school, and how having a support system would have made that journey easier. Anthony's project won first place, but the real victory came in the weeks that followed. As the Young Truth Ambassadors program took shape, students from other schools began reaching out, wanting to start their own chapters. What had begun as a single school initiative was growing into a movement. Rose watched with pride as her son navigated his new role as program founder, while still maintaining his own growth and healing. She had started dating again, this time with a different perspective. Her new friend, a kind-hearted history teacher named David, had his own story of choosing truth over convenience, having once reported academic fraud at his previous school despite pressure to stay quiet. One evening, as they all shared dinner together, David asked Anthony about the challenges of running the ambassador program. "The hardest part," Anthony reflected, twirling spaghetti around his fork, is helping people understand that being brave doesn't mean you have to do it alone. The program's first big test came when a 7th-grade girl named Joy approached one of the ambassadors about her parents' messy divorce. Her father had asked her to hide information about his new relationship from her mother, placing her in an impossible position. Anthony worked with the school counselor to help Joy navigate the situation. Together, they helped her find the courage to tell both parents how their actions were affecting her. The experience became a teaching moment for the entire ambassador program about the complexity of truth and the importance of professional support when needed. As summer approached, Rose received an unexpected email. A production company wanted to make a documentary about their story, focusing not just on the wedding day, but on the ripple effects of one brave decision. The producer was particularly interested in how Anthony's choice had inspired other young people to stand up for truth in their own lives. "What do you think?" Rose asked Anthony, showing him the email. They were sitting in their favorite spot on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Anthony considered the question carefully. "If it helps other kids feel less alone, like I did, then maybe we should do it. But can we make sure it shows how scary it was too? I don't want people to think being brave means not being afraid." The documentary filming began, capturing not just their story, but the stories of lives they had touched. Linda and her children participated, sharing how their healing journey had led them to start their own support group for families affected by similar situations. The teenage girl from the high school presentation appeared, now a confident young woman helping other teens navigate difficult truths. During one of the interviews, the filmmaker asked Anthony what he would say to his younger self, the boy standing in that wedding venue about to speak up. Anthony's answer brought tears to the crew's eyes, would tell him that what feels like the end of something is actually the beginning of something better. That the truth might hurt for a little while, but lies hurt forever. Rose's organization had grown too, now offering workshops in schools across the state. She had developed a special program for single parents, helping them recognize red flags in relationships and trust their instincts. Her work had earned her a nomination for a Community Service Award, though she insisted that Anthony was the real hero of their story. One day, while helping his mother prepare for a workshop, Anthony found the old phone that had contained the evidence against Richard. It seemed smaller now, less threatening. "Remember when finding this felt like the scariest moment of my life?" he said, showing it to Rose. She took the phone, turning it over in her hands. "And now look at all the good that came from that moment. You didn't just save us from a lie, baby. You started a chain reaction of truth that's still going." The Young Truth Ambassadors program had its first annual conference, bringing together students from different schools who had started their own chapters. The event was held in the same community center where the wedding was supposed to take place, but the space felt different now, filled with young voices eager to make a difference. During the conference, Anthony led a workshop on courage in action, sharing practical strategies for speaking up when something isn't right. But his favorite part was listening to other students share their stories, each one unique, yet connected by the common thread of choosing truth over silence. As he stood on stage at the closing ceremony, looking out at the sea of young faces, Anthony felt a deep sense of peace. The pain of that wedding day had transformed into purpose, and his moment of courage had become a movement of change. 2 years had passed since that fateful wedding day, and the community center was once again filled with people gathering for a celebration. This time, it was for the premiere of the documentary, Truth Speaks, the Anthony Taylor story. The same space that had once witnessed a moment of crisis was now transformed into a symbol of triumph and transformation. Anthony, now 14, stood in front of the mirror adjusting his tie, a different one from that wedding day, but the moment felt somehow similar. This time, though, his reflection showed not a scared boy carrying a heavy secret, but a confident young man who had learned the true meaning of courage. "Ready, sweetheart?" Rose appeared behind him, looking elegant in a deep blue dress. Her eyes sparkled with pride and joy, a far cry from the tears she had shed 2 years ago. The photographer from the Youth Leadership magazine is here for the interview. The documentary screening had drawn people from all walks of life. Linda and her children had flown in from Cleveland. Detective Chen sat with her family in the front row. Representatives from various schools running the Young Truth Ambassadors program filled several rows. Even some of the wedding guests from that day had come to show their support. Before the screening began, Rose took the stage to address the gathered crowd. 2 years ago, in this very room, my son taught me the most valuable lesson of my life, she began, her voice clear and strong. He showed me that love isn't about maintaining comfortable illusions. It's about having the courage to speak truth, even when it breaks your heart. The documentary began to play, opening with scenes from their neighborhood, interspersed with interviews of people whose lives had been touched by their story. The audience watched in rapt attention as the narrative unfolded, not just the story of a stopped wedding, but the journey of healing and transformation that followed. During the scene recreating the wedding day, Anthony felt a small hand slip into his. It was Joy, the 7th grader he had helped through her parents' divorce. Now one of the most active Young Truth ambassadors, she had become like a little sister to him. "You were so brave," she whispered. The documentary didn't shy away from the hard parts, the tears, the doubt, the fear. But it also showed the beauty that had grown from those difficult moments. It featured the Truth Tellers initiative in schools, Rose's work with survivors of relationship fraud, and the growing network of Young Truth ambassadors making a difference in their communities. After the screening, during the reception, Anthony found himself surrounded by young people eager to share their own stories. A boy from Seattle had started a cyberbullying awareness campaign after being inspired by the ambassador program. A girl from Houston had helped her friend escape an abusive relationship by speaking up. "You see?" Rose said, finding a quiet moment with her son amidst the celebration. "Your courage that day wasn't just about stopping a wedding. It was about starting a movement." The documentary had caught the attention of national education organizations, and schools across the country were now implementing truth-telling and integrity programs based on their model. Rose's organization had received funding to expand its reach, and she was writing a book about rebuilding trust after betrayal. Later that evening, as the crowd began to thin, Anthony received an unexpected message. It was from Richard's son, who couldn't attend but had watched a private screening of the documentary. "Thank you," the message read. "Your bravery helped our family find healing too. Dad's actions hurt us all, but the truth set us free to build something better." Standing in the community center's garden, where guests were enjoying dessert under strings of twinkling lights, Anthony reflected on how much had changed. David, Rose's new friend, was chatting with Aunt Lisa by the fountain. The two had bonded over their shared passion for education, and David had become a valuable advisor for the Ambassador Program's school outreach efforts. A local news crew arrived to cover the documentary premiere, and the reporter asked Anthony what message he hoped people would take from their story. He thought carefully before answering, "I want people to know that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you choose to do what's right anyway. And sometimes, what feels like the end of your world can actually be the beginning of something beautiful." The evening concluded with a special ceremony honoring the first graduating class of Young Truth Ambassadors. 20 students from different schools received certificates, but more importantly, they shared stories of how the program had changed their lives and their communities. As Anthony handed out the certificates, he remembered something his mother had told him during their darkest days: "Truth is like a seed. Plant it in good soil, tend it with care, and it will grow into something strong and beautiful." Looking at the faces of these young truth-tellers, Anthony could see that seed had grown into a mighty forest. Each ambassador had their own story, their own moment of choosing truth over silence, and together they were creating a future where courage and honesty were celebrated rather than feared. The night ended with a surprise announcement. A National Youth Leadership Foundation had chosen their program as a model for a nationwide initiative. The young truth ambassadors would now have the resources to expand to schools across the country, creating a network of support for young people facing difficult choices. As they drove home that night, the car filled with comfortable silence, Anthony noticed his mother wiping away tears. "Happy tears," she assured him, catching his concerned look in the rearview mirror. "I was just thinking about how sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead us to our true purpose." Back home, Anthony sat on their porch swing, looking up at the stars. The same sky had witnessed his moment of courage 2 years ago, and now it watched over a community transformed by truth. His phone buzzed with messages from ambassador program members sharing their experiences from the premiere, each one a reminder that no act of courage goes to waste. Rose joined him on the swing, wrapping a warm blanket around them both. "You know what I'm most proud of," she said softly. "Not just that you were brave enough to tell the truth that day, but that you've helped create a world where others feel brave enough to tell their truths too." Anthony smiled, thinking of all the young truth-tellers he had met, each carrying their own light into the darkness of silence and fear. Maybe that's what courage really is, he reflected. Not just speaking up once, but helping others find their voice too. As the stars twinkled overhead, mother and son sat together, their journey from that wedding day having led them not to an ending, but to a new beginning, one where truth was not just spoken but celebrated, where courage was not just an act but a way of life, and where love meant being brave enough to light the way for others.